Hey, what's up guys? This video is for section 2.3, which is solving multi-step equations. So now we are actually going to solve the equation and we want to find that value of the variable. Now it does say here a multi-step. So you can have one step to solve, two steps to solve, three steps to solve, but it just depends how the equation is. And the goal, once again, I'm going to say it, you want the value of the variable. So you might have an x for the variable, a y, m, the letter doesn't matter. It's just a variable that we are looking for. Now I do have three steps that we can follow in order to solve an equation. Now these are the steps I use every time I solve. So you guys can follow these three steps. There's different ways to solve an equation, but my steps are, number one, I want to simplify each side of the equation and get all the variables on the same side. Now, how do I do that? Well, when I look at the equation, remember that the equal sign is going to divide the equation in two parts, the left side and the right side. So I need to use the distributive property whenever I can. If I have parentheses, I have to multiply, distribute the number outside. I have to combine like terms if we have any x with an x, a y with a y, those are like terms. And I can cancel fractions if I have any fractions by multiplying by the denominator, and we'll talk about that in this video. And we want to get all the variables on the same side. That's step number one. There's a lot of work on that, but that's going to help you to solve for the variable. Step number two, you are going to eliminate the constants. Now this is very important, the constants on the same side of the variable, not on the other side. You have to know where the variable is at. So once you know where that variable is, you eliminate the constants that's on the same side of that variable. And remember, keep in mind, constant is the number with no variable. So it's going to be on the right side of the constant. Sometimes it's on the left side of the variable. I said constant. I do apologize. It is the variable. It's on the right side of the variable or on the left side of the variable, but the constant is just a number with no letter, no variable. After you do step number two, now you go to step number three. Step number three, you isolate the variable, which means you get the variable by itself. You want the x by itself, you want the y by itself, or whatever variable we have, you want it by itself. So how do you do that? Well, you guys are going to use the inverse operations for multiplying and dividing. So to isolate the variable, you are going to divide or you're going to multiply. Okay? Now let's go back one step back, which is step number two. I forgot to mention, to eliminate the constant, you want to use the inverse operations for adding and subtracting. So that means that to cancel or to eliminate the constant, you add the opposite, or the additive inverse. That's the mathematical term, but it's just adding the opposite of the constant. So when you solve equations, keep in mind, guys, we have three steps that we can follow. Now, an equation, you don't have to do all three steps. Sometimes you just do step number two and step number three. Sometimes you just do step number three, or sometimes you do all three steps in order to solve. That's where one step equation comes in, or two steps equation comes in, or multi-step equations comes in. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to use all the three steps every time you solve an equation. You just have to understand the problem first, and then you guys need to make a plan of how to solve for the variable. And then you guys execute that plan, and finally you guys check your answer, ask yourself if it makes sense. So for this video, we are going to start with two-step equations, and then we're going to go into multi-step. So we're going to make a transition. We're going to start really simple, something basic, and then we're going to make that transition into a multi-step equation. And we are going to have fractions, so you guys will see how to, some teachers say clear fractions, have to cancel fractions, or how to get rid of those fractions. So this example, it has 6 different equations. I'm just going to show you guys the difference. Notice this one here. We do have an x on the left side of the equal sign. Here's the equal sign. Over here, we also have an x. On this one, we have a b, and notice it's negative, so we have to be careful with the signs as well. Here we have an m, which is the variable. Now here we have fraction, and r is the variable. And over here we also have r, but the fraction is a little bit different than the previous one. So let's start with the top left hand. So let me just zoom in here. And when we want to solve, remember the word solve is when you want to find the value of the variable. So we are actually going to find the value of x. What is x? Right now, when you look at the equation, we don't know what number that is. But the idea is to keep a balance. Remember that an equation is just like a balance scale. So we want to know what number can we put in x. So you substitute into the x, and it's going to keep a balance on the left side and the right side of that scale. So if we know that the right side, notice here's the equal sign, the right side equals 14, so there's the number. All of this right here also has to be 14. So that's where the value of x is important. We want to know 8 plus 3 times what number is going to equal 14 to keep a balance. Now you guys can use common sense on equations, but I'm going to show you guys the actual steps to solve the equation. So one thing that I do is for you guys to differentiate the two sides, the left side and the right side, I make a line under the equal sign. Now people don't have to do this. You guys don't have to draw a line under the equal sign, but that's what I do to show you guys that on the left side of the line, which is the equal sign, we do have an expression, 8 plus 3x. That's an algebraic expression. On the right side, we have an expression as well. 14 is just a natural number, or you guys can say an integer, but we do have a number. So we go by the steps. Step number 1, you want to simplify each side of the equation. So when I look on the left side, notice here, these two are not like terms. The 8 doesn't have an x, so I cannot combine. We don't have parentheses, so I cannot use the distributive property. We don't have fractions, so I don't have to get rid of fractions. So guess what? I'm done with step number 1. I can go to step number 2. Over here, 14 is just a number by itself, so you guys cannot do anything to that number. So you go to step number 2. Step number 2, you are going to eliminate the constant on the same side of the variables. Now this is very important. There's the variable. The variable is on the left side of the line. So I'm looking on the left side of the equal sign, and the constant is right here. That 8 doesn't have a variable. So I'm going to do the opposite of that number. So I know 8 here is positive because there's an invisible plus on the side. And I'm just going to put that for now so you guys can see it is a positive 8. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to add the inverse, or I'm going to use the additive inverse. Remember, that's just the opposite. So opposite of positive 8 is negative 8. So I am going to subtract 8, and to keep that balance on the balance scale, whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side. So I'm going to jump to the other side of the line, and I'm going to subtract 8 over here, minus 8. Now I like to add a line here so you guys know that we're adding or subtracting. So when you look at the constants on the same side of the variable, these two numbers here, positive 8 minus 8, well, that's 0. They cancel. So I'm going to cross them out because we don't have to put that 0 under the line. It's just nothing. But the next term, plus 3x, well, we don't have anything on the bottom. You're not supposed to subtract 8 here because you only do it once on each side. So this 3x, you just bring it down under the line. So we have positive 3x. I don't need the plus next to the 3. It's just an invisible plus. And on the other side, when you go to the other side of the line, right here, you guys actually simplify this subtraction. 14 minus 8. And 14 minus 8 is 6. So you put a positive 6. Careful with the signs because we do have negatives and positives. And you have to go back to those rules of integers. Now, step number 3. We did step number 2. Now we go to step number 3. Step number 3, well, we do have a variable with a number right here. Now you also have to understand what's happening to the 3 and the x. You don't have anything in between, so you are multiplying the 3 and the x. So in order to get the x by itself, to isolate that variable, you do the inverse, the opposite of that operation. So since we're multiplying, opposite is division. So I'm going to divide by the number next to the x. So I'm going to divide by 3. And I'm not using that division symbol like in elementary because we started using fractions now. So the fraction line, it means division. So you are dividing by 3. And to keep that balance again, if you divide by 3 on the left side, you have to divide by 3 on the right side. So I'm going to divide by 3 here. So here, if you look at 3 divided by 3, well, those don't cancel, but they do simplify to 1. Now look what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to put a big 1 right here because that's what it simplifies to, 1. We do have a 1 with an x. So that 1x, I bring it down. And on the other side, let me just put the line a little bit further down. On the other side, you guys are going to divide 6 by 3. 6 divided by 3, and that's 2. So we have a 2 here. Now a couple things. This 1 next to the x, we don't need it. You guys can make that an invisible 1. So we just put x. And I'm going to change the line into an equal sign. I'm going to go back to the equal sign because that's where it comes from. Just follow the line, and the line is from the equal sign. So it equals 2. So my answer is x equals 2. And that's solving. You want to find what value is for the x. And we know that x is 2 for this equation. Every equation, the values of the variables change. So just keep that in mind. And solving is to find that value. Now this one here, same idea. You guys have negative 6 minus 2x equals 4. Well, you guys have to follow the 3 steps I give you guys. But first, let me just put a line under the equal sign right here. So I noticed that I don't have parentheses on either side of the equation. So there's no parentheses. I don't have to distribute. These two are not like terms, the 6 and the 2x. 6 doesn't have an x, so I cannot combine like terms. The 4 is by itself, so I cannot do anything on the right side of the equal sign. I don't have fractions, so I don't have to get rid of fractions. I don't have to clear the fractions. So I can actually go to step number 2. Step number 2 is you eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. So here's the variable, and the constant is this one, 6, negative 6 doesn't have an x. So we do the opposite. We use the additive inverse of that number. So negative 6, the opposite will be positive 6. So I'm going to add 6 to this side. Now remember to keep that balance. Whatever you do to one side of the scale, you have to do it to the other side of the scale. So over here. So I'm going to do plus 6. And notice that I'm only doing it once on each side of the line. I add 1 6 on the left side, and I add 1 6 on the right side. You only do it once. You don't have to add 6 here because you just do it once on each side. So I'm going to put the line here. And I know that negative 6 plus 6 cancels. So that's 0. You don't need to put that 0. I'm going to bring down the negative 2x right here. So I'm going to put negative 2x. And on the other side, I'm just going to simplify 4 plus 6. And that's 10. You actually add those natural numbers, or you can say integers. 4 plus 6 is 10. And now I go to step number 3. Step number 3, I need to isolate the variable. Now remember that we are multiplying negative 2 times x here. There's nothing in between. So the opposite of multiplication, the inverse opposite, will be division. So I'm going to divide by the number. Now you have to be careful because we do have a negative number, negative 2. So that means that I have to divide by that negative with the 2. So you put the division line and you put the negative 2 underneath. And on the other side, you do the same thing. You divide by negative 2. Now here, guys, negative 2 divided by negative 2, negative divided by negative, that's positive, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So all of that, guys, would turn into positive 1. Now remember that we don't need that 1 in front of the x. So I'm just going to bring down the x right here. I'm going to put the equal sign. And on the other side, 10 divided by negative 2, you have to be careful with those signs. A positive 10 divided by a negative 2, it's negative 5. And remember that when you're dividing or multiplying, if you guys have odd number of negatives, the answer is negative. But if you guys have even number of negatives, the answer will be positive. But right now we only have one negative, so my answer is negative 5, right here. So let's keep going on this one. We do have negative b plus 6 equals negative 11. So first of all, I'm going to draw the line right here because I need to know what I need to do on the left side and the right side. So I check step number 1. Notice, once again, I don't have parentheses, I don't have fractions. These are not like terms, so you guys cannot do anything to this side. So we skip step number 1. This one is by itself, so we just go to step number 2. Step number 2, you eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. So this one is the variable b, and it's negative b. So the constant is right here. The 6 doesn't have a b. So the opposite will be minus. That's the opposite of plus 6. So you do minus 6 on one side, and you go to the other side, and you also do minus 6. So let me put the line right here. And I'm going to cross this out because positive 6 minus 6, those are additive inverse of each other, the opposites of each other, so they cancel. So you bring down the negative b, and on the other side, you combine, careful with the signs, negative 11 minus 6, that is negative 17. Now, over here, guys, b is not by itself. Even though you don't see a number, you actually have something next to it. You have a negative, and remember that we have an invisible 1 here. So actually, the b has a negative 1. So that means we have to get rid of that negative 1. b is not by itself. So to do that, guys, remember that negative 1 is multiplying the b. There's nothing in between here. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So you guys are going to divide by that number, negative 1. And to keep that balance, you do the same thing to the other side. You divide by negative 1. So check your signs. Be careful with the signs. So here, you have a negative 1 times negative 1 divided by negative 1. Well, negative divided by negative is positive, and 1 divided by 1 is 1. So all of this right here is going to turn into a positive 1. I don't need that 1 because it can be an invisible 1, and it is positive. So I bring down the b right here. I put the equal sign, and on the other side, you do have a negative 17 divided by a negative 1. Notice we have 2 negatives. That's even number of negatives, so it's going to turn positive. And 17 divided by 1 is just 17. So the answer is positive 17. b equals 17. Now here, same idea. You guys are going to put the line underneath the equal sign. You guys are going to check step number 1. These are not like terms. We don't have parentheses. We don't have fractions. We can go step number 2. Step number 2, you guys are going to eliminate the constant. So the constant is that minus 7. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. I'm going to put the line here so you guys know that I'm going to cancel those two. So I'm going to cross out the 7s because they're opposite from each other. That's going to be 0, negative 7 plus 7. I'm going to bring down the negative 4m right there, guys. And I'm just going to put it close to the line so I don't have a big gap in between. So there's the negative 4m. And on the other side, I have 11 plus 7. That's going to be 18. So now I go to step number 3. Step number 3, you isolate the variable. So to isolate the variable, you guys get rid of this number by doing the opposite, which is division. Since you're multiplying here, you divide. So I'm going to divide by negative 4, and I go to the other side and I divide by negative 4. So this right here is going to turn into positive 1, and there's the m. And over here, let me put the equal sign. Let me bring that down the equal sign. On the other side, now notice, this is a fraction, 18 over negative 4. You guys cannot divide evenly. 4 doesn't go into 18 evenly. So what you have to look for is if you can reduce simplified fractions. Now 18 and 4, they do have a common factor, which is 2. You guys can divide 18 by 2. You guys can divide 4 by 2. So you are going to simplify, and you have to reduce fractions. And since we only have one negative, my answer is going to be negative. So first, I'm going to put a negative here, and there's my fraction line. And I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2. So on the top, the numerator, 18 divided by 2 is 9. And the denominator, 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now notice, guys, it is negative 9 over 2 because we only have one negative in this fraction. So odd number of negatives is going to be negative. So my answer is m equals negative 9 over 2. If you guys have fractions like this one here, r over 4 equals 3, well, step number 1 is you guys have to get rid of fractions. You have to distribute. You have parentheses or combined like terms if you have any. Now let me show you guys how to get rid of fractions if you have any in an equation here. So the fraction we have is r over 4 equals 3. So the only way, or what you can do to get rid of fractions, you have to multiply by the denominator. So denominator is the bottom of the fraction, and we do have a 4 here. So I'm going to multiply that fraction by 4. So let me put in parentheses. Remember that parentheses means multiplication. You don't have anything in between here, the parentheses and the fraction. So you are multiplying. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side. So you have to multiply by 4 as well. Now remember that when you guys have fractions and you're multiplying by another number, well, you make the other number a fraction. So I'm going to put a 1 under the 4 right there to make it a fraction. And one thing you can do in fractions where you're multiplying, you can cross simplify. So notice the 4's across from each other. 4 and 4, you can simplify that by 4. You can divide. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So this would turn into 1. This would turn into 1. Now guess what, guys? When you guys simplify those, 1 times r is just r, and 1 times 1 on the bottom is just 1. So we have r over 1. And on the other side, let me put the line right here. You guys are going to multiply 3 times 4. You are multiplying because there's nothing in between, and that's going to be 12. Now going back to the left side, this one here, the 1 on the bottom of the fraction, we don't need it because when you divide by 1, whatever it's on the top divided by 1 is just what's on the top. So you keep the r, not the 1 on the bottom, bring down the equals, and 12. So to get rid of fractions, and that's a thing that we can do, you multiply by the denominator. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side to keep that balance, just like the balance scale. Now if you guys have a number on top of the fraction like this one, negative 3r over 7 equals 6, well, to get rid of the fraction, you do the same thing. You multiply by the denominator, but you're going to have to work with the number on the top as well. So first, let's get rid of the fraction. This is step number 1. You guys get rid of the fraction, and then you solve for the variable. So the denominator is 7, so I'm going to multiply by 7. So in parentheses, I'm going to put that 7 right here. I'm going to multiply by 7. On the other side, I'm also going to multiply by 7 because whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side. Let me put the line right here so we know that we are working on both sides. So remember that this 7 here, you can make it a fraction. You put a 1 under, but every time you guys multiply by the denominator, you don't have to do that. All you can do, guys, it's just like you can skip one step. You just simplify the number you're multiplying and the denominator. So 7 and 7, that simplifies to 1. So you guys can cross these ones. You put a 1 here, but remember that we don't need those 1s. So basically, you're just multiplying by 1. So if you guys have a negative 3, remember that negative goes to that 3, and you multiply 3r, you multiply by 1, that would be negative 3r. So I'm going to bring down the negative 3r. I don't need the 1 on the bottom because in a fraction, it's just an invisible 1 on the bottom. And on the other side, I do multiply 6 and 7. And 6 times 7 is 42. So the next step, this is step number 2, not step 2, step number 3. You guys isolate the variable. So here's the variable. We do have a negative 3 on the left side. We are multiplying negative 3 times r. So I do divide by negative 3. So the opposite of multiplication is division. And I do have to keep the sign of that 3. So on the other side, I also divide by negative 3. So this right here will turn into positive 1. Negative 3 divided by negative 3. You bring down the r. I'm going to bring down the equal sign. And on the other side, 42 divided by negative 3. Careful with the signs. That'll be negative 14. So my answer is r equals negative 14. Alright guys, I'm going to have to do a second part of this lesson, so make sure you guys watch my second video. If you guys like my videos, hit that like button, and you guys can also subscribe to my channel. Make sure you guys practice your math, and I'll see you guys later.